When I was a kid, and if I'm being honest, even when I was a teenager, my dream was that I would have an opportunity to play professional sports. That sport changed a couple different times. In elementary school, it was a professional baseball player. By middle school, that shifted to being a professional basketball player. And so that was my dream. That was my goal. And so I dreamed the dream, and I would practice outside in the snow. In my mind, that was what I was going to do. I just knew it. And so early on, when I dreamed of playing professional sports, one of the things that my mom taught me is that, well, if you want to play professional sports, you need God also to want you to play professional sports. And so that was interesting idea. And so I figured, well, obviously God would want me to be in the NBA, but I'm going to do what my mom said. And so I'm going to pray for it. And so I started in middle school. I would pray every single day to be a professional basketball player. And so I'd pray something along the lines, God, if it's your will that I would be in the NBA someday, that'd be awesome. I will try my best. I will do my best for the team. I'll give you all the glory. And I had it all played out in my head. Like, people were going to be saved because of me being a basketball player. Like, we would win the championship and I would be on the platform telling people, like, all thanks be to God because of my game-winning shot. But here was the challenge, though, for me in praying that prayer. As I got further and further in high school, other people got a little bit taller, a little bit faster, and sure, I had a decent jump shot, but I was not quick. I never learned how to dunk. I did, though, in order to learn how to dunk, buy some very expensive shoes. They're not really tennis shoes. They're called jump soles, which had really big bottoms and heavy weights, and I would exercise in them. I still couldn't dunk. And so God's will wasn't that I would be in the NBA. I thought it would be, but that wasn't God's plan. See, what's amazing about God's will, and I even remember my mom telling me this growing up, that God's will is always best. And so the thing that I was praying would be God's will, it wasn't God's will. And I remember my mom actually teaching me that, RJ, if God's will isn't for you to play professional basketball, he'll have something even better in mind for you. And see, that's the hard thing, though, about God's will. Sometimes our plan isn't always the best plan. Sometimes our will isn't God's will. And so when Jesus teaches us to pray and says, your will be done, what he's teaching us to do is he's teaching us to trust. He's teaching us to trust that his will is actually best, that his will for our life, his plan is best, his way of thinking and living is best. And sometimes that's hard for us to believe. And so Jesus teaches that. And Jesus not only teaches to pray, your will be done, but Jesus actually does that in his own life. There's an event where Jesus is actually in the garden right before he's going to die, and he prays the same prayer. Like, Jesus doesn't want to have to die, right? He doesn't want to do it, but he's willing to do it. And so his prayer to the Father is, God, if it's your will, take this cup. And what he's saying in that moment is, God, if there's any other way that I don't have to do that, if your will could be any other plan than going to the cross, Jesus says, I'm in for that plan. But the plan is that Jesus would go to the cross. And so Jesus, even in that moment, says, all right, that's not what I would most want to do, but I'm willing to do it. If that's your plan, that's what I'm willing to do. See, what Jesus was doing in that moment was trusting that his Father knew what was best. We can also see, there's a story in the Old Testament that I love, the example of trusting in God's will. Joseph, as a kid, he's his father's favorite, and so he gets this coat of many colors. But very quickly, things start to go wrong for Joseph, and so Joseph's brothers are all jealous of him, and so they devise a plan, and they're gonna either kill him or sell him into slavery. Thankfully, he ends up being sold into slavery and doesn't get killed, but he gets sold into slavery, and he just has event after event after event that things go bad. He ends up getting thrown in prison for something he didn't even do, and so he gets falsely accused. He ends up in prison. In prison, he has an opportunity to interpret some people's dreams, and so he does. With God's help, he tells them what the dreams are going to mean, and he says to them, all right, but remember me when you get out of prison, and they forget. And so Joseph, over and over and over again, have things not go the way that he would plan. I can picture Joseph praying, like, God, if it's your will that I would get out of prison for this thing that I didn't do, remember, God, would you let that happen? And then it doesn't happen. But what's amazing about Joseph is he continues to trust in God's will, even when it doesn't match his own. Even when it's difficult to believe that God has his best interest in mind, Joseph continues to trust. Joseph continues to do what's right, even when it's difficult to do so. See, when things aren't going your way, or when things don't go according to your plan or your dreams or your hope, it can be easy to stop trusting God, to assume that your will is better than God's and just not try his way. Or when you think you might know something better than God, and maybe you wouldn't say it that way, but maybe the Bible tells you right and wrong, and you think the wrong thing is the better thing. And so maybe for you in that moment, it's easier to trust your way over God's way. It's easier to trust yourself than it is to trust God. But what you can see in Joseph didn't do that. And our prayer, when we pray your will be done, is that we wouldn't do that we would trust God's will over our own, that we would trust God's will over our feelings sometimes, that we would trust God over the circumstances that we're in. And so when we pray, your will be done, that's what we're praying, that God's will would be done in our life, that God's plan would happen, and God's plan is going to happen, but we would also pray that we would recognize and trust that God's way is best. And so this week, what I would want to challenge you to answer when you think about your own prayer life is, before you pray, maybe answer the question, when is it most difficult for you to trust in God's will? Is it because of a circumstance going on in your life? Is it something going on in your home or in your family? And you could point to that and say, all right, it's really hard for me to believe that God's got a plan right now. Or maybe it's with a decision that you have to make, and there's a right choice or a wrong choice, or maybe there's a choice that you're not quite so sure what's right, what's wrong. And so maybe because of that choice, it's hard for you to trust, all right, God, what really is your will for me in this situation? When is it difficult for you to trust God? And then knowing that, pray that God would help you know his will. Pray that God would help you know that he has a plan, that you would trust it even when you're not sure what that plan is, and that God would help you choose to do what's right, even when that right choice might be a difficult choice.